You think family is forever, right? That no matter what, your children will always love and respect you. That's what I believed too, until my own daughter looked me in the eyes and told me I would never see my grandchild again. Because of my so-called outdated views. Her words shattered me, but what she didn't know was that I held a secret in my hands, a gift I had prepared for her family, a once-in-a-lifetime trip across Europe, already paid in full. In that moment, everything changed. The pain turned into anger, and the anger into something sharper, revenge. And trust me, she never saw it coming. They say betrayal never comes from strangers. And I learned that the hardest way, through my own daughter. My name is Eleanor, I'm 52 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've worn the badge of mother as my proudest identity. I wasn't a CEO, or a millionaire, or a world traveler, though I could have been some of those things if I hadn't devoted everything to raising my child. No, my greatest ambition was always Emma. My daughter. My pride. My joy. From the moment I first held her in my arms, tiny and pink and screaming at the top of her lungs, I promised myself she would never go without love, without protection, without opportunities. Life wasn't easy, we weren't rich. I worked 2 jobs at one point, sleeping barely 4 hours a night, just so she could go to dance classes, have new clothes for school, and never feel less than the other kids. I used to tell myself, one day she'll understand. One day, Emma will look back and realize the sacrifices I made. One day, she'll thank me, hug me, and maybe even cry with me for all the nights I cried alone just to make sure she had more. But one day never came. Emma grew up beautiful, ambitious, and strong-willed. She was the kind of girl who lit up every room she walked into, with her long chestnut hair and quick smile. People adored her, and I adored her even more. But somewhere between high school and adulthood, something changed. She became sharper, colder, quick to dismiss me with a roll of her eyes. I told myself it was just adolescence, a phase, nothing permanent. And yet, as the years passed, the distance widened. Emma married young, at 23, to a man named Daniel. He was polite enough in the beginning, though I always sensed a certain stiffness when he was around me, as if he considered me outdated, irrelevant. I bit my tongue, because Emma was happy, and isn't that all a mother should want? When their first child was born, my grandson, Oliver, I thought the circle had come full. Holding him for the first time, inhaling that sweet, milky baby scent, I felt like I'd been given another chance. The love I had poured into Emma, the tears, the late nights, the sacrifices, they all found new life in that tiny boy's heartbeat. I dreamed of weekends together, family dinners, trips to the park, Christmas mornings filled with laughter. That dream became the foundation for my biggest gift yet. I started planning a trip, a once-in-a-lifetime, all expenses-paid European vacation for Emma, Daniel, little Oliver, and me. I wanted to show my daughter the world, to give her the kind of memories I could never afford when she was younger. Rome, Paris, Barcelona, the Swiss Alps. I pictured us walking cobblestone streets, eating gelato, riding gondolas, taking photos that would one day hang framed in her house, labeled Summer in Europe. I spent over a year quietly saving and planning. I cut corners in my own life. I stopped buying new clothes, delayed fixing the creaky fence in the backyard, even sold a few pieces of jewelry from my younger days. I researched child-friendly hotels, direct flights to minimize stress, tours that balanced fun and culture. Every detail was meticulously designed so Emma's family would have nothing but joy. When I finally told her, she gasped. "Mom. Are you serious? You're paying for all of us?" I smiled, my heart swelling at her surprise. "Of course. I want you to experience the world. I want Oliver to grow up with memories bigger than this little town." She hugged me, quickly, but tightly, and for a fleeting moment, I felt like I had my little girl back. Her eyes sparkled, and she called Daniel, her voice bubbling with excitement. He didn't sound as enthusiastic, more cautious than overjoyed, but I brushed it off. This was my gift. My way of proving that despite everything, I was still her biggest supporter. For weeks, the house buzzed with planning. Emma sent me lists of places she wanted to see, outfits she wanted to buy for Oliver, even ideas for Instagram captions. I laughed, imagining her parading through Paris in a chic trench coat, Daniel reluctantly trailing behind with the stroller. It was perfect. It was finally going to be our time, our second chance. And yet, beneath the excitement, there was an undercurrent I couldn't quite name. Small comments Emma made, about how I needed to loosen up, how my views on parenting were a little too traditional, how the world isn't like when you raised me. She would laugh when she said it, tossing her hair back, but I noticed Daniel's approving nods each time. I tried not to take it personally. After all, every generation has its differences. Maybe I was old-fashioned. Maybe I did believe children needed discipline, structure, and respect more than freedom to express every emotion. But wasn't that the foundation that raised Emma into the strong woman she was today? Still, I bit my tongue. The trip was too important to spoil with disagreements. This was supposed to heal us, not widen the cracks. But if I had listened more carefully to those cracks, if I had paid attention to the way Emma's smile didn't quite reach her eyes when I disagreed with her, maybe I would have seen the storm gathering on the horizon. Maybe I would have realized that my daughter wasn't just tolerating me, she was quietly judging me, storing ammunition for a battle I didn't even know was coming. The truth is, I thought I was building a bridge. But Emma was already lighting the match to burn it down. And the day she finally set it ablaze would leave me gasping, trembling, and questioning everything I thought I knew about being a mother. Because when your own child looks you in the eye and says you'll never see your grandchild again, the world doesn't just tilt, it shatters. The first signs didn't look like signs at all. They looked like harmless comments, casual remarks, things a mother should probably ignore if she wanted peace. But peace is fragile. It doesn't take much for a glass surface to crack, and once it does, no matter how carefully you handle it, it will never be whole again. At first, it was Emma questioning my parenting style whenever I spent time with Oliver. One afternoon, I was babysitting him while she and Daniel went to dinner. Oliver, restless and fussy, threw his toy truck across the room and stomped his little foot. My instinct was to kneel down, look him in the eye, and say firmly, "No, Oliver. We don't throw toys. Pick it up and apologize." He pouted, but he obeyed. He picked up the toy, muttered a soft sorry, and sat back down. To me, that was a win, discipline with love, the same way I'd raised Emma. But when she came home and saw me correcting him, her expression tightened. "Mom," she said carefully, though her voice carried a sharp edge, "we don't talk to Oliver like that. We encourage him to express his feelings, not shut them down." I blinked. I didn't shut him down. I just reminded him not to throw toys. Someone could get hurt. She sighed, rubbing her temples as though my words were exhausting. That's not how parenting works anymore. It's outdated. Kids need to feel free, not controlled. The word stung, outdated. It rolled off her tongue like an accusation, as if everything I had done to raise her was a relic, useless, irrelevant. I wanted to defend myself, to shout that if not for my outdated views, she wouldn't even have the foundation of strength she so proudly stood on today. But instead, I bit my tongue. I told myself it wasn't worth fighting over one little word. But one little word became another. At dinner one evening, I suggested Oliver try some vegetables before dessert. Emma's eyes flashed instantly. "Mom, don't food shame him. He'll eat when he's ready." When I mentioned church and how important the community had been for Emma growing up, she scoffed. "That's your thing, Mom. It doesn't mean it has to be ours." Even the way I dressed was up for commentary. One afternoon, I wore a simple navy dress, nothing fancy, just something I felt comfortable in. Emma raised her eyebrows. That's very conservative. You know, you'd look younger if you dressed more modern. It was endless, like small cuts I didn't notice bleeding until I realized I was covered in wounds. And every time Daniel was around, his silence screamed approval of Emma's dismissals. He would sit back, lips pressed into a thin line, watching like a judge nodding at the prosecution's every argument. The trip was supposed to unite us, but instead, it felt like the planning process magnified every rift. I suggested a guided tour through the Vatican. Emma scoffed, calling it boring. I mentioned visiting the Louvre in Paris. She shrugged, saying Oliver would be too young to care. I talked about the Swiss Alps. Daniel interrupted, pointing out that they'd rather spend time somewhere trendier, like Ibiza. Still, I tried to keep my patience. I told myself it was just preferences, generational differences. I even convinced myself that maybe I was being oversensitive. After all, I wasn't the one in the prime of life anymore. They were young, modern, the future. I was just the support beam. But deep down, something gnawed at me, a quiet realization that Emma didn't see me as her foundation anymore, she saw me as an obstacle. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon. We were sitting in Emma's living room, Oliver playing on the floor with blocks. A commercial for a family vacation in Italy came on the television, sunlit piazzas, couples strolling with gelato, children laughing as pigeons scattered in the square. I smiled, turning to Emma. That's going to be us soon. Just imagine Oliver chasing pigeons in Rome. Her response wasn't a smile. It was a laugh, sharp, humorless. Mom, honestly? Sometimes I wonder if this whole trip is about you reliving your dreams, not about us. You're stuck in this old-fashioned idea of what family should look like. But things aren't like that anymore. Daniel and I don't want Oliver raised with your outdated views. And if you can't accept that, then maybe you don't belong in his life at all. The words hit like a slap. Maybe you don't belong in his life at all. I sat frozen, staring at my daughter, my flesh and blood, as if she'd just become a stranger in front of me. My chest tightened, my throat went dry, and I felt the sting of tears pushing at the corners of my eyes. Oliver, oblivious to the storm that had just erupted, giggled as his block tower tumbled. The sound twisted the knife deeper. How could Emma say such a thing, cut me out of his life as if I were nothing? I managed to whisper, "You would really keep me from my grandson. Because of how I raised you. Because I believe in teaching respect?" Emma crossed her arms, her face set like stone. "Yes. If it means protecting him from your outdated, controlling ways, then yes." I wanted to scream, to collapse, to beg her to take it back. But all I could do was sit there, shaking, the room suddenly feeling colder than winter. That night, I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words again and again. You don't belong in his life. The same ceiling that had witnessed decades of tears, tears for bills I didn't know how to pay, for sickness I couldn't afford treatment for loneliness after Emma left home, now saw fresh ones fall. I had sacrificed everything for her. And this was my reward, exile from my grandson's life. But sometimes, despair plants the seed of resolve. Lying in the dark, my heart breaking, I realized something I had never dared admit before. Emma believed she held all the power, that I would endure any insult just for the privilege of being near Oliver. But she was wrong. I wasn't just her mother. I was the woman who had built her world, brick by brick. And if she wanted to test whether I could live without her approval, well, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. Because I held the one card she had underestimated. The trip. The dream she had already bragged about to her friends. The glamorous vacation she'd built up in her mind as proof of her perfect little family life. And just like she had threatened to cut me out of Oliver's world, I would show her that I could cut her out of mine. I stood in the kitchen, the smell of freshly brewed coffee drifting through the air, when Emma's words from the night before echoed in my mind like a cruel refrain: "If you don't change, you won't see your grandchild again." My hand trembled as I lifted the mug to my lips, and I had to set it down before I spilled it. My chest ached with the weight of her ultimatum. It wasn't just about views or opinions. It was about being shut out of a future I had long dreamed of, rocking my grandchild to sleep, telling them the same bedtime stories I once told Emma, baking cookies together on rainy afternoons. All those visions evaporated in one sentence. I replayed the conversation in my head, Emma's arms crossed, her eyes flashing with that steely determination she'd had since she was a little girl. I had seen that look before, when she refused to eat vegetables at 5, when she demanded to go to summer camp at 10, when she declared she was moving in with Daniel at 22. But this time, her defiance wasn't charming or youthful. It was cutting. Final. As the morning light filtered through the kitchen window, I found myself drifting back to memories I hadn't visited in years. I remembered Emma's first dance recital. She had been so nervous, clutching the hem of her tutu, her lip trembling. I had knelt down, taken her tiny hand, and whispered, "You're braver than you think, sweetheart. Just dance like the living room." And she did. She twirled across that stage like a little star, her curls bouncing, her eyes shining with pride. I clapped so hard my palms stung. That same little girl was now a grown woman telling me that I was no longer fit to be in her child's life. How had we come to this? Later that day, Emma stopped by again, this time without Daniel. She stood in the doorway, hesitant but firm. "Mom, I don't want to fight," she began. "Neither do I said, though my voice cracked. "But you can't expect me to abandon who I am just to fit into your mold of what's acceptable." Emma sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's not about abandoning who you are. It's about adapting. The world is different now. What you call tradition sounds oppressive to me. And I don't want my child growing up around that energy." "Oppressive?" I repeated, the word like acid in my mouth. "Emma, I raised you with love. Every sacrifice I made was for you. And now you stand there and tell me that I'm dangerous to your child? That I'm not worthy to be their grandmother?" Tears welled in her eyes, but she held her ground. "I'm not saying you're dangerous. I'm saying your mindset doesn't align with the values I want to instill. You don't see it, but your comments can be hurtful. Times change. People change. I need you to change too." My throat tightened. "And if I don't?" She looked away, her silence answering louder than any words could. When Emma left, the house felt unbearably quiet. The walls seemed to echo with the laughter that used to fill them, the teenage giggles over silly crushes, the late-night talks when she couldn't sleep, the sound of her piano practice drifting from the living room. I sat on the couch, clutching a framed photo of us from years ago. Emma was 12, beaming in her graduation gown from middle school. My arm was around her shoulders, my smile as wide as hers. We looked inseparable then. Now we were strangers living in different worlds. As the hours dragged on, sorrow began to morph into something hotter, sharper. Anger. How dare she? How dare she reduce me to nothing more than a relic of outdated views? I wasn't some dusty artifact in a museum. I was her mother, the woman who had stayed up nights when she had the flu, who had worked double shifts to afford her college tuition, who had put my own dreams on hold so she could chase hers. And this was my reward? Exile from the most precious chapter of her life. I paced the living room, my mind racing. I thought of the European vacation I had been planning for months, poring over travel guides, booking family-friendly excursions, finding hotels with suites big enough for all of us. It was supposed to be a gift, a once-in-a-lifetime experience to bond as a family before the baby arrived. But now, the thought of treating them to that generosity while being branded a toxic presence felt unbearable. Why should I spend my hard-earned savings on people who thought so little of me? That evening, Daniel called. His tone was careful, as if he were walking on eggshells. "Eleanor, I know things are tense right now," he said. "But maybe, with some time, everyone can cool down. Emma just feels strongly about." "Don't, Daniel," I cut him off, my voice sharp. "Don't try to soften it." She made herself clear. "Unless I abandon who I am, I won't see my grandchild. Do you understand how cruel that is?" He sighed heavily. "I understand it's complicated. But you know Emma, once she decides something, it's hard to change her mind." I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. "And what about you? Do you agree with her?" There was a long pause. "Finally," he said, "I support my wife." That was the nail in the coffin. I hung up before he could say more. By the time I went to bed that night, my decision was made. If Emma truly believed I was outdated, unworthy, or unfit to be in her child's life, then she would have to learn what it felt like to lose something precious too. The European vacation, the dream I had carefully built for months, would be the first casualty. But it wouldn't stop there. As I drifted off to sleep, a plan began to crystallize in my mind. For the first time since Emma's cruel words, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I was no longer just a grieving mother. I was a woman reclaiming her dignity. And Emma had no idea what storm was about to come. The next morning, I woke with an unusual calmness. Not peace, but a cold clarity that settled deep in my bones. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the dining table with my notebook open. For months, that notebook had been filled with lists of flights, hotel options, train schedules, even restaurant recommendations for Paris, Florence, and Prague. Every detail of the European trip had been carefully planned to give Emma and Daniel the experience of a lifetime. Now, staring at those neatly written pages, I felt nothing but bitterness. I flipped to the first page where I had written, "A family adventure before the baby arrives." My handwriting looked foreign to me, like the words of a woman who no longer existed. That version of me had been hopeful, eager to please, desperate to bridge the distance that had started to creep between me and my daughter. But that woman was gone. Emma had killed her with her ultimatum. What remained was someone sharper, less forgiving. I picked up the phone and began making calls. One by one, I canceled the reservations, first the flights, then the hotels, then the guided tours. Each confirmation email that landed in my inbox felt like a small act of justice. With every cancellation, I imagined Emma's face when she realized the gift she had so callously taken for granted was no longer hers to enjoy. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. Why should I bankroll a luxurious vacation for a daughter who saw me as unworthy of even the smallest role in her child's life? The travel agent, who had worked tirelessly to secure our bookings, sounded shocked. "Are you sure, Eleanor? You're walking away from thousands in credits." "Yes," I said firmly, my voice like steel. "I'm sure." When the last reservation was gone, I leaned back in my chair and let out a long, shaky breath. For the first time in days, I felt powerful. Emma thought she could dictate the terms of our relationship, strip me of my dignity, and still reap the benefits of my sacrifices. She was wrong. But I wasn't finished. Canceling the trip was only the beginning. That evening, Emma called. Her tone was casual, almost cheerful. "Hey, Mom. Daniel and I were wondering if you had the final itinerary for the trip. We wanted to start packing early." The audacity of her voice made my stomach turn. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tightly. "Emma," I said slowly, "there is no itinerary." "What do you mean?" she asked, laughter in her voice. "You've been planning this for months." "I canceled everything," I said, my words deliberate, sharp as glass. There was silence on the other end. Then, incredulity. "You canceled? Why would you do that? Because, Emma, I hissed, you made it clear I am no longer welcome in your life, or your child's life, unless I change who I am. Why should I reward cruelty with generosity? Why should I spend my money and energy on someone who doesn't respect me? Her gasp was audible, and when she finally spoke, her voice cracked with rage. Are you serious? Do you know how much we were looking forward to this? Do you know how expensive it would have been for us to plan something like that on our own? Yes, I said calmly. I know exactly how expensive it would have been. That's why it was a gift. A gift you threw away the moment you decided my values made me unfit to be a grandmother. Her anger erupted like a storm. This is manipulative, Mom. You're punishing me for setting boundaries. You're proving exactly why I don't want my child exposed to your toxic mindset. I clenched my jaw. Call it whatever you want, Emma. But understand this, I will not be your doormat. I will not bankroll your life while being cast aside like yesterday's trash. She started to cry, but I didn't falter. You always taught me to stand up for myself, she sobbed. Yes, I shot back, and I am. Right now. We hung up without saying goodbye. For the next few days, the silence between us grew thicker, heavier. Daniel tried calling once, his voice measured, asking if there was any way to work things out. I told him plainly that the only way forward was respect. Respect for me as a mother, respect for me as a human being. Until then, there would be no vacations, no gifts, no safety net. He sighed, muttered something about stress not being good for Emma during her pregnancy, and ended the call. But Emma wasn't done. A week later, she showed up at my doorstep, her belly starting to show beneath her loose sweater. She didn't knock, she barged in like she still had that right. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, and her voice trembled with fury. How could you do this to me? She demanded. To us? This was supposed to be our last big adventure before the baby. Now it's ruined. Completely ruined. Do you even care? I looked at her, really looked at her, the daughter I had raised, the woman who now stood before me, dripping with entitlement. My heart ached, but my spine stayed straight. Do I care? I repeated softly. Emma, I cared when I stayed up nights nursing you through fevers. I cared when I skipped meals so you could go to dance lessons. I cared when I worked myself to exhaustion to send you to college. I have cared every single day of your life. But now, I care about myself too. And I will not allow you to weaponize love against me. Her lips trembled. You're choosing pride over family. No, I said firmly. I'm choosing dignity over manipulation. The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Emma's tears spilled over, but I didn't reach for her. For once, I let her feel the sting of consequence. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I stood in the silence that followed, my chest heavy but my resolve unshaken. She thought her ultimatum would break me. Instead, it had forged me into something stronger. As I watched her car pull away, I realized the trip was more than just a vacation. It was a symbol. A symbol of all the ways I had tried to hold our family together, of all the sacrifices I had made without thanks. By canceling it, I had reclaimed something far greater than money or travel. I had reclaimed myself. Emma would learn, in time, that actions have consequences. She could shut me out of her child's life, but she could not expect me to keep giving endlessly while being treated as nothing. I was her mother, not her servant. And though the pain still lingered, beneath it was a quiet triumph. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't losing anymore. I was finally taking something back. In the days after Emma stormed out of my house, the silence grew heavier than ever. I would walk through the rooms and feel the echoes of our past, her laughter drifting down the hallway when she was a teenager, the clatter of her piano keys during practice, the muffled sound of her crying when her heart was broken for the first time. Now, that silence was thick, suffocating, and final. I kept waiting for the phone to ring, for her to call and apologize, or even just to scream at me again. But nothing came. The days stretched into weeks, and the distance between us solidified like cement. I began to realize that Emma wasn't going to bend. Not this time. She truly believed her version of morality was superior, that I was nothing more than an obstacle to be pushed aside. The bitterness of her words still cut me open. You'll never see your grandchild because of your outdated views. Every time I thought about it, I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms. It wasn't just rejection. It was erasure. She had erased me from her future, from her child's life, as though I were a stain she could scrub clean. And yet, despite the fury that burned inside me, there was grief too, grief so deep it nearly swallowed me whole. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, imagining what it would feel like to hold my grandchild for the first time. The tiny fingers curling around mine. The soft weight of a newborn against my chest. That bond was something I had yearned for, something I thought was my reward for decades of sacrifice. Now, it was a dream dangled in front of me, only to be snatched away. One evening, as I sat by the fireplace with a glass of wine, I caught sight of the notebook again, the one filled with the travel plans I had so ruthlessly cancelled. I flipped through its pages, my pen marks slashing through flights and hotel names like scars. And I realized something: canceling the vacation had given me back my dignity, but it hadn't given me peace. The war inside me still raged. That was when I made a choice. A choice not to chase Emma, not to beg for scraps of affection, not to twist myself into a version of modern she could tolerate. I chose, instead, to rebuild my life without her approval. If she wanted to shut me out, then I would stop standing at the door waiting to be let in. The first step was redirecting the money I had saved for the European trip. Thousands of dollars that had been earmarked for luxury hotels and fine dining were now mine to do with as I pleased. I donated a portion to a women's shelter in the city, a place I had once turned to for volunteer work. When I handed over the check, the director's eyes filled with tears. "You have no idea how much this will help," she whispered. For the first time in weeks, my chest loosened. That money was no longer a bribe for love, it was a lifeline for people who truly needed it. The rest, I decided, would go toward myself. I booked a solo trip through Europe, retracing the very same itinerary I had once planned for Emma and Daniel. But this time, it was mine. Mine alone. When I stood beneath the Eiffel Tower, gazing up at its shimmering lights, I didn't feel regret. I felt alive. When I strolled the cobbled streets of Florence, tasting gelato and marveling at Renaissance art, I didn't think of what Emma was missing. I thought of what I had gained: freedom. And when I took a river cruise through Prague, the city lights reflecting like jewels on the water, I raised a glass to myself. To Eleanor. To the woman who had finally stopped begging for love that came with conditions. But of course, Emma found out. When I returned, my phone buzzed with a furious string of messages. "So you just went without us? Seriously? Do you know how selfish that is? While I'm here, pregnant, stressed, and you're off gallivanting through Europe?" I stared at her words, my thumb hovering over the screen. A bitter laugh escaped my throat. Selfish. That was the word she used. After everything I had done, after every sacrifice, she dared to call me selfish for finally choosing myself. I typed one sentence and hit send. "You made your choice, Emma. Now I've made mine." There was no reply after that. Just silence, heavy and final. Months passed. Emma had her baby, a beautiful little girl I only saw through photos online, shared by distant relatives. Each picture was a knife in my chest, but I didn't reach out. Not once. I wanted to, God knows I wanted to. But I had learned my lesson: love given under threat is not love at all. And then, one morning, a letter arrived in the mail. It wasn't long, just a few sentences scrawled in Emma's handwriting. Mom, I know things are broken between us. But when I held my daughter for the first time, I thought of you. I thought of all the nights you stayed up with me, all the sacrifices you made. I don't know if I'm ready to forgive yet, or if you are. But I don't want my child growing up without knowing her grandmother. Please. Let's talk. I sat there, the paper trembling in my hands, tears spilling down my cheeks. It wasn't an apology, not fully. But it was a crack in the wall she had built between us. A tiny opening. I didn't know where we would go from there, or if the wounds could ever fully heal. But I knew one thing, I had stood my ground. I had shown Emma that I was not disposable, that my love could not be manipulated, that my dignity mattered. And now, if we rebuilt, it would be on equal terms. Not as a woman begging to be included, but as a mother who demanded respect. As I folded the letter and set it down, a strange sense of peace washed over me. For the first time in months, I felt like maybe, just maybe, the future wasn't lost. And if Emma is watching this, if she ever truly listens, I hope she knows one thing: love is not a weapon, and respect is not optional. I am your mother, not your enemy. And one day, you may realize that losing me was the biggest price you ever paid.